Hello everyone, I'm Colin Connett. Today I'm going to explain to you how to make this really back-saving sheet hauler. So what I have here is a sheet carrier. And when I say a sheet, I'm talking about a plywood sheet, an MDF sheet, even sheet rock. And the way it works is you drop your sheet goods onto the jig, then it collapses and holds them, and I'm going to explain more about that later. And because it's got wheels, of course, you can now transport it, and you're not carrying it, you're just sort of holding one end or letting it balance and being able to move it, pivot it, and move it wherever you want without having to lift. For example, a sheet of MDF is almost 90 pounds. So today, I'm not going to be wasting your time cutting wood. I'm not going to be doing any assembly because I've already assembled this a few times, but what I'm going to do is explain to you all of the detail on what I went through and how to assemble this, and I'll put a parts list on Woodwork Web, so anybody who wants to make this, you won't have plans per se, but you'll have a parts list and the methodology on how to put it together. So I first saw a picture of this many, many years ago, and I saved that picture, and it looked quite a bit different than what this one looks like. There was no dimensions on how high this needed to be. These little blocks underneath here, those weren't included. And what I found by experimenting, the first version of these that I made, when you put the MDF in, the sheet of MDF, it almost always wanted to flip on one side or the other, and when it does that, it doesn't want to move because there's so much weight on it. And of course, now you've got this much weight that you're trying to hold up and move around. So I found that that didn't work, and that you would have to have some kind of centering, and that's what those blocks did. So I had to experiment with how high this needed to be and how high those blocks needed to be so that you could actually center that, because only when you're centered do you have good movability and all of the weight is centered between the two wheels, so it's much easier to move around. Once you've got the base plates made, you're going to want to connect them by a hinge on each side, or you could use a piano hinge. Whatever you select, it should be a pretty heavy duty. The only other thing that I can tell you is that the pin part of the hinge, the humpy part here, that wants to be underneath so that you have the flat part on the top. The next part of your project, you're going to be making the uprights and the 45-degree angles if you haven't already made them, and also your spacer sticks down here. And you can see that I use natural lumber, and that's what I recommend for this. And the reason for that is plywood is not the best for screwing into the end grain of, and you're going to be securing these by driving screws up through the bottom of the base in these. So that's why natural lumber is better. And my only other comment here, you're going to be working with smaller pieces of wood here, so I just want to give you a heads up here to make sure that you're working safely with smaller pieces. So remember, the golden rule of woodworking is we always start from the largest wood and work down. We don't start off by cutting a little piece of wood like this and then working with that. Where we can, we start with a larger piece. So when you're cutting a 45-degree angle and you don't have a bandsaw, you don't have something that you feel as safe with, except maybe a miter saw or table saw, you start with a longer piece of wood. You can now set that at 45 degrees, cut that angle first, so this will now come off, and the next thing you do is turn your saw to a 90 degree and cut that off. Quick and simple and easy, and probably the safest on a sliding miter or on a table saw. So the next thing to do is to attach your clasping sides here to your 45-degree angle. And of course we want to do that ahead of time so that we put as many parts together as we can. Now that you have the two sides attached, now you can put these little sort of divider pieces down in here. And probably the best thing to do with those is to glue those on, because all of this you will have assembled all of this, so there won't be any way of screwing those together, and gluing those will be just fine. In fact, you could even hot melt glue those on there, would work just fine. And once now you've basically got the entire top done. The next thing, and basically the last thing to do, is to put the wheels on. And remember, the wheels are fixed, and I'll tell you in the plans or on the description in Woodwork Web what the height of these wheels are, because that's kind of a critical amount to know, because when you come down on the wood, you want to make sure that the base collapses and that it doesn't go so down too far that it's going to bottom out here. So there's a few things to note on that. Now the last thing that you're going to be putting on is, and I found this a big help as well, I've used what we call grate tape, and this is a rug tape. I'll show you what this is. For those of you who follow my channel, you'll know that I use this stuff on the bottom of my mag switches, and it helps them grip better. If you don't have grate tape, and this is a really handy thing to have around your workshop. I'm finding more and more uses for this grate tape. It's basically an anti-skid material, and you've seen me talk about this a lot in the past. You can put the alternative is to put an anti-skid material on there. All you need to do is staple it. Some staples down in here, even along the top would be fine. And the reason for that is when that gets on there and it grips that wood, whenever you're pivoting or if you hit a bump or something, the whole thing doesn't sort of vibrate or jump. It sort of grips that wood whenever you're using it. So it really does make a difference having the anti-skid on there. Well, here we are in my shop, my little tiny shop, and here's a 3/4 inch piece of MDF. This is not a full sheet. This is cut down to about 6 feet or so, 4 by 6 feet, and for me, it moves it around just perfectly. You can move back and forth. You can take it and spin it. When you're picking the sheet goods up, you can drop it right onto your little dolly here and move it around, and it's really easy to move around without having to lift and carry. But look at, here's the other bonus, is that if you build this thing correctly, the sheet goods will stand up on their own. It actually has enough grip, and that's because of the anti-skid material. If you don't put that on there, I don't recommend you try this, but you can. This will actually hold up by itself, so that's another little bonus. So a really handy little device if you're packing around sheet goods. Now, since I've had a chance to use mine, let me tell you some of the things to watch for. When you take it to your plywood, it's probably going to want to sit like that. And of course, it's very hard to lift plywood or MDF into it when it's collapsed like this. So mine will sit like this just fine. If you turn it on the edge, it will sit just fine. And then I can take and drop my sheet goods onto it, and it clasps it right away. If yours does not do that, my suggestion is to use something like bungee cords underneath it. Pretty simple, quick fix, and it puts some pressure. You can see that it puts some pressure on the underside so that it should then sit like that, and it will still, when you drop your sheet goods onto it, it will still collapse just fine. So a quick fix for that. The other thing that you're going to notice is when you get to the place where you want to take the sheet goods off, what's going to happen is you take this off, and now you've got a collapsed piece of dolly sort of underneath. So you're going to have to watch for that. Either you're going to sort of be ahead of time a way to kick it off, or maybe you can pivot your goods so that it's away. But just to be aware that you need to leave space. Don't get there and figure out you haven't figured out how to take it off of there, because especially MDF, as I've talked about, you know, it can weigh upwards of 90 pounds that you're working with. So just some things to be aware of when you're using it. Well, that concludes my video for today. You know, just another appliance that will help save your back if you're moving heavy plywoods or MDFs around your workshop, and you know there's a lot of good reasons to use those kinds of things. You know, they're flat, they're stable, and I've even made some live edge plywood. If you haven't seen that video, that might be something you want to have a look at, how to make your own live edge plywood. But you know, you could do the same thing with MDF and still get the same results. So you can have a look at that video right here. I'm Colin Cadet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.